I had always thought of our town as somewhat of a serene sanctuary, a place where nothing ever went wrong. It was the kind of place where the most exciting event was the annual fair, a time when the entire community came together to celebrate and enjoy simple pleasures. The fair was a highlight of the year, with its colorful rides, games, and the smell of cotton candy filling the air. The laughter of children and the chatter of neighbors created an atmosphere of joy and unity. But that was before the virus hit. Before everything turned to chaos and fear, shattering the tranquility we had taken for granted. The serene sanctuary we once knew was transformed into a place of uncertainty and dread. The first time I heard about the virus was through a whispered conversation at the local diner, the place where everyone gathered for coffee and gossip. It was a typical morning, the kind where the regulars sat in their usual spots, discussing the latest town news. The clinking of coffee cups and the hum of conversation filled the air. "Did you hear about Jim? Said he's seeing monsters. Stayed holed up in his house all day," one of the regulars murmured, his voice low and filled with concern. I dismissed it as small-town exaggeration, thinking it was just another rumor blown out of proportion. But then the school shooting happened, and everything changed. The whispers of concern turned into shouts of alarm, and the sense of safety we once felt evaporated. As a police officer, I was called to action. The scene was pandemonium. Screams echoed through the hallways, and terrified children huddled in corners, their faces pale with fear. Gunshots rang out, sharp and deafening, creating a cacophony of terror. I remember the cold sweat that trickled down my neck as I moved through the corridors, trying to find the shooter. Fear clung to me like a second skin, but I couldn't let that stop me. I had a job to do, a duty to protect the innocent lives that depended on me. The responsibility weighed heavily on my shoulders, and each step felt like a battle against my own fear. I found the shooter, a boy named Ethan. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and he was mumbling incoherently about shadows and demons. He looked as scared as the kids he was terrorizing, his hands shaking uncontrollably. With a mix of luck and adrenaline, we managed to wrench the gun away from him. He collapsed in my arms, sobbing uncontrollably, his body trembling with fear and confusion. The sight of him, so young and so terrified, haunted me. It was a stark reminder of how deeply the virus had affected our community. Ethan was one of the first confirmed cases of the virus. The doctors explained that it induced extreme fear and hallucinations, leading people to act on their most primal instincts. It wasn't long before more and more people started exhibiting similar symptoms, their minds overtaken by irrational fears. Our town was descending into madness, the once peaceful streets now filled with uncertainty and dread. The virus spread like wildfire, and the sense of hopelessness grew with each passing day. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my wife, Helen, told me she was pregnant. The news should have brought us joy, a beacon of hope in dark times, but instead, it compounded my fears. How could we bring a child into a world so contaminated with danger? The virus was spreading fast, and there seemed to be no stopping it. Every day, new cases were reported, and the sense of helplessness grew. The joy of expecting a child was overshadowed by the fear of the unknown, and the future seemed more uncertain than ever. Our days dissolved into a blur of terror and uncertainty. Every cough, every odd behavior became a potential sign of infection. Helen tried to reassure me, keeping herself strong for both of us, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The streets were now shadows of their former selves, empty and desolate, draped in silence except for the occasional scream that shattered the night. The once vibrant community was now a ghost town, its residents hiding in their homes, afraid of the unknown. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, and the fear of what lay ahead consumed us. One night, I was on patrol when I got a call. A family had barricaded themselves in their house, claiming to see terrifying visions. As I arrived at the house, my hands shook. This wasn't just a public duty anymore, it was personal. I saw my unborn child in every terrified face, the fear of the unknown mirrored in their eyes. The family was hysterical, talking about creatures with blood-red eyes and gnashing teeth, their voices filled with panic. I helped them as best I could, calming them down until the paramedics arrived. But their eyes haunted me for days afterward, a constant reminder of the fear that had taken hold of our town. The sense of helplessness was pervasive, and the weight of responsibility was almost unbearable. At home, things were equally tense. Helen tried to keep busy, preparing for the baby, but I knew the anxiety was gnawing at her. We talked about leaving town, but where would we go? The virus was spreading everywhere, and there seemed to be no safe haven. The thought of starting over in a new place was daunting, and the uncertainty of the future weighed heavily on us. The fear of the unknown loomed large, and the sense of security we once felt was a distant memory. One evening, I found Helen sitting in what would be the baby's room, tears streaming down her face. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. I held her close, my own tears mingling with hers. "I am too," I whispered. But we couldn't let fear paralyze us. We had to move forward, not just for us, but for the life growing inside her. We made a pact to stay strong, to face whatever came our way together. The bond between us grew stronger, and we found solace in each other's presence. The virus showed no signs of abating, but we learned to live with the fear. We took every precaution, avoided unnecessary risks, and clung to each other for strength. Helen's pregnancy was a beacon of hope amidst the shadows. It gave us something to fight for, something to believe in. We found solace in small moments of joy, in the anticipation of our child's arrival. The sense of purpose kept us going, and the love we shared provided a glimmer of hope in the darkness. As the days turned into weeks, and then months, I began to understand the true nature of courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. The virus forced us to face our darkest fears, but it also gave us a newfound appreciation for life and each other. We found strength in our love, in the promise of a future together. The challenges we faced brought us closer, and the sense of unity helped us endure the hardships. When Helen went into labor, the fear resurfaced with a vengeance. The hospital, filled with the infected, was a place we had to avoid. With trembling hands, I assisted her at home. It was the most terrifying and awe-inspiring moment of my life. The hours seemed to stretch on forever, each contraction bringing a mix of pain and hope. The uncertainty of the situation added to the fear, but the anticipation of our child's arrival kept us going. And then, amidst the agony and sweat, came the cry of our newborn son. A sound that dispelled the shadows, if only for a moment. Holding him in my arms, I felt the weight of responsibility and the overwhelming love that came with it. In that instant, I knew that no matter what nightmares the virus brought, we would face them together. For our son, for our future. Our town may have been tainted by a deadly virus, but in our little home, we had found our sanctuary once more. The world outside remained uncertain and perilous, but we had each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The love we shared and the strength we found in each other provided a sense of hope and resilience. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. The journey through fear and uncertainty has only just begun, and there are more tales to uncover. As the deputy sheriff in Barron County, Ohio, my days were often filled with the harsh realities of a struggling community. The once thriving coal industry had long decayed, leaving behind an economic void filled with drug abuse and domestic violence. My name is Sean Hammond, and these hard truths were only part of my routine until that fateful night when a new wilderness incident unfolded. James, my partner, and I were on another monotonous patrol through the desolate streets when the radio crackled to life. A child's voice, distressed and trembling, screamed through the static, "Help! My sister's gone." Dispatch informed us immediately of a reported child abduction near the New Wilderness Wildlife Preserve. Dropping everything, we sped towards the location, our sirens breaking the oppressive silence of the abandoned streets. New Wilderness wasn't always a place to avoid. It was initially designed as a sanctuary to restore the area's natural beauty, but over time, it became little more than a neglected afterthought, overgrown and largely forgotten. Tonight, it bore a sinister air as we drove through the darkened entrance, trees looming like silent sentinels. Arriving at the reported location, James and I found a battered old camper parked haphazardly among the trees. The windows were dark, and the door stood slightly ajar. As I approached, my heart pounded with an unshakable sense of dread. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a putrid combination of decay and blood that made my stomach churn. We entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. The inside of the camper was a chaotic mess of overturned furniture, broken glass, and splatters of blood. Each step we took was accompanied by a foreboding creak, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. James's flashlight beam landed on a small, blood-stained teddy bear. The sight of it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The deeper we ventured, the more apparent it became that we were dealing with something far beyond a simple abduction. In one corner, I found bizarre symbols scrawled in what looked like blood. The markings were unlike anything I'd seen before, primitive yet deliberate. Was this the work of a cult, or something even more nefarious? Suddenly, a faint, muffled cry echoed from the rear of the camper. My gut instinct kicked in, urging me forward. We forced open a locked door, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, huddled and trembling, was a little girl, no older than 8. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror. "You're safe now," I reassured her, lifting her into my arms. But even as I said it, the unease gnawed at me. We needed to get her out of there. James and I took the girl back to the squad car. Her name was Emily, and between sobs, she told us about the monster that took her sister. She described it with the vivid, terrifying detail only a child could: long claws, glowing eyes, and an insatiable hunger. Most would dismiss her story as nothing more than a frightened child's imagination running wild, but the evidence we had seen suggested otherwise. Determined to uncover the truth, we called in additional units and began a full sweep of the New Wilderness area. The hours that followed were a blur of searchlights, barking dogs, and frantic voices. We combed through the forest, following trails of blood and strange tracks. Each clue led us deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Then we stumbled upon it, a hidden cave, shrouded in darkness. The entrance was marked by the same strange symbols we found in the camper. With no other leads to follow, we ventured inside. What we discovered defied all logic and reason. Inside the cave, the temperature plummeted. The walls were covered in more of those eerie symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. In the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, and surrounding it were the remains of ritualistic offerings, animal bones, melted candles, and grotesque relics. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cavern. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. A hulking figure emerged, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. It was a creature unlike anything in the natural world, part beast, part nightmare. We fired our weapons, but the bullets seemed to have little effect. The creature lunged with supernatural speed, knocking James to the ground. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I grabbed a metal rod from the altar and swung it with all my might, striking the creature. To my surprise, it recoiled, screeching in pain. It seemed the altar, or something within the cave, held power over it. The creature, now wounded, retreated into the shadows. We took the opportunity to escape, dragging James out of the cave. As we reached the safety of the forest, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. Back at the station, we pieced together the fragments of our encounter. Emily's sister was never found, but the sighting of the creature and the cave's contents pointed to a grim reality. This place held ancient, dark secrets that were better left undisturbed. The new wilderness was more than just a neglected preserve, it was a gateway to something far more sinister. In the days that followed, we made official reports and handed over our findings to higher authorities. The area was cordoned off, and rumors of the events spread quickly through the community. But even with the precautions, the sense of unease lingered. I often think back to that night and the horrors we uncovered. The new wilderness still stands, a silent monument to the unknown. And while life in Barron County continues, I urge anyone reading this to stay far away from that forsaken place. Some secrets are meant to remain buried, and some places are better left in darkness. In the end, the new wilderness taught me that not all monsters hide under the bed. Some lurk in the shadows of our world, waiting for the unwary to stumble upon them. As the deputy sheriff in Barron County, Ohio, my days were often filled with the harsh realities of a struggling community. The once thriving coal industry had long decayed, leaving behind an economic void filled with drug abuse and domestic violence. My name is Sean Hammond, and these hard truths were only part of my routine until that fateful night when a new wilderness incident unfolded. James, my partner, and I were on another monotonous patrol through the desolate streets when the radio crackled to life. A child's voice, distressed and trembling, screamed through the static, "Help! My sister's gone." Dispatch informed us immediately of a reported child abduction near the New Wilderness Wildlife Preserve. Dropping everything, we sped towards the location, our sirens breaking the oppressive silence of the abandoned streets. New Wilderness wasn't always a place to avoid. It was initially designed as a sanctuary to restore the area's natural beauty, but over time, it became little more than a neglected afterthought, overgrown and largely forgotten. Tonight, it bore a sinister air as we drove through the darkened entrance, trees looming like silent sentinels. Arriving at the reported location, James and I found a battered old camper parked haphazardly among the trees. The windows were dark, and the door stood slightly ajar. As I approached, my heart pounded with an unshakable sense of dread. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a putrid combination of decay and blood that made my stomach churn. We entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the inky blackness. The inside of the camper was a chaotic mess of overturned furniture, broken glass, and splatters of blood. Each step we took was accompanied by a foreboding creak, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. James's flashlight beam landed on a small, blood-stained teddy bear. The sight of it made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The deeper we ventured, the more apparent it became that we were dealing with something far beyond a simple abduction. In one corner, I found bizarre symbols scrawled in what looked like blood. The markings were unlike anything I'd seen before, primitive yet deliberate. Was this the work of a cult, or something even more nefarious? Suddenly, a faint, muffled cry echoed from the rear of the camper. My gut instinct kicked in, urging me forward. We forced open a locked door, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, huddled and trembling, was a little girl, no older than 8. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with terror. "You're safe now," I reassured her, lifting her into my arms. But even as I said it, the unease gnawed at me. We needed to get her out of there. James and I took the girl back to the squad car. Her name was Emily, and between sobs, she told us about the monster that took her sister. She described it with the vivid, terrifying detail only a child could: long claws, glowing eyes, and an insatiable hunger. Most would dismiss her story as nothing more than a frightened child's imagination running wild, but the evidence we had seen suggested otherwise. Determined to uncover the truth, we called in additional units and began a full sweep of the new wilderness area. The hours that followed were a blur of searchlights, barking dogs, and frantic voices. We combed through the forest, following trails of blood and strange tracks. Each clue led us deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Then we stumbled upon it, a hidden cave, shrouded in darkness. The entrance was marked by the same strange symbols we found in the camper. With no other leads to follow, we ventured inside. What we discovered defied all logic and reason. Inside the cave, the temperature plummeted. The walls were covered in more of those eerie symbols, glowing faintly in the dark. In the center of the chamber lay a stone altar, and surrounding it were the remains of ritualistic offerings, animal bones, melted candles, and grotesque relics. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the cavern. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. A hulking figure emerged, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. It was a creature unlike anything in the natural world, part beast, part nightmare. We fired our weapons, but the bullets seemed to have little effect. The creature lunged with supernatural speed, knocking James to the ground. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I grabbed a metal rod from the altar and swung it with all my might, striking the creature. To my surprise, it recoiled, screeching in pain. It seemed the altar, or something within the cave, held power over it. The creature, now wounded, retreated into the shadows. We took the opportunity to escape, dragging James out of the cave. As we reached the safety of the forest, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees. Back at the station, we pieced together the fragments of our encounter. Emily's sister was never found, but the sighting of the creature and the cave's contents pointed to a grim reality. This place held ancient, dark secrets that were better left undisturbed. The new wilderness was more than just a neglected preserve, it was a gateway to something far more sinister. In the days that followed, we made official reports and handed over our findings to higher authorities. The area was cordoned off, and rumors of the events spread quickly through the community. But even with the precautions, the sense of unease lingered. I often think back to that night and the horrors we uncovered. The new wilderness still stands, a silent monument to the unknown. And while life in Barron County continues, I urge anyone reading this to stay far away from that forsaken place. Some secrets are meant to remain buried, and some places are better left in darkness. In the end, the new wilderness taught me that not all monsters hide under the bed. Some lurk in the shadows of our world, waiting for the unwary to stumble upon them. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. The wind howled through the dense forest as I stood at my post in the Adirondack Mountains. The winter had been particularly harsh this year, and today was no exception. Snowflakes swirled around me, creating a white curtain that obscured my vision. I was the only ranger on duty at the remote station, and the solitude was both a blessing and a curse. The biting cold seeped through my layers of clothing, making my fingers and toes numb despite my best efforts to stay warm. As I was about to head inside to warm up, I noticed a group of people approaching. They were clearly not dressed for the weather, and as they drew closer, I realized they were tourists. Their light jackets and thin gloves were no match for the brutal cold, and their faces were red and chapped from the wind. I greeted them and learned they were from Spain, caught off guard by the sudden storm and seeking shelter. I welcomed them into the station, offering them hot drinks and blankets, trying to make them as comfortable as possible in the small, cramped space. Among the group, there was one man who stood out. He was dressed inappropriately for the weather, wearing only a thin jacket and jeans. His eyes darted around the room, never settling on one place for too long. Something about him made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside, focusing on helping the tourists. He seemed restless, his hands constantly fidgeting with the hem of his jacket, and his gaze never meeting mine. Despite my unease, I offered him a hot drink, which he accepted with a curt nod. As the hours passed, the storm intensified. The wind howled louder, and the snow piled up against the windows, creating an almost impenetrable barrier. I tried to keep the atmosphere light, sharing stories of the mountains and answering their questions about the wildlife. The tourists were fascinated by the tales of bears and wolves, their eyes wide with curiosity. But my mind kept drifting back to the strange man. He had barely spoken, and his presence felt like a shadow looming over us. Every time I glanced his way, he seemed to be watching me, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Late in the afternoon, I received a call on the radio. A group of campers had been reported in the area, but they hadn't registered at any of the stations. With the storm raging, they could be in serious danger. I knew I had to find them, but the thought of leaving the tourists with the strange man made me hesitate. I had no choice, though. I grabbed my gear and headed out into the blizzard, my heart heavy with worry. The tourists watched me go, their faces a mix of fear and gratitude. The snow was relentless, and visibility was almost zero. I trudged through the forest, guided only by my instincts and the occasional break in the trees. The wind whipped around me, making it hard to hear anything but its constant roar. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon the campsite. It was a scene of chaos. Tents were shredded, supplies scattered, and the snow was stained with blood. My breath caught in my throat, and a sense of dread settled over me. My heart pounded in my chest as I searched the area. I found a body, brutally dismembered and partially buried in the snow. The sight was horrifying, and I fought the urge to be sick. The blood had frozen in the cold, creating a gruesome tableau that seemed almost unreal. I had to get back to the station and call for help. As I turned to leave, I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, my pulse racing. There, standing at the edge of the campsite, was the strange man from the station. His eyes glinted with a malevolent light, and a twisted smile spread across his face. He took a step towards me, and I realized with a jolt of fear that he was the one responsible for the carnage. His presence seemed to suck the warmth from the air, leaving me feeling cold and exposed. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my composure. "What do you want?" I shouted over the wind. He didn't answer, just kept advancing. His movements were slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. I knew I had to act fast. I reached for my radio, but he lunged at me, knocking it from my hand. We grappled in the snow, his strength surprising me. He was like a wild animal, driven by some dark, primal urge. His hands were strong and unyielding, and his eyes burned with a manic intensity. The fight was brutal. I managed to land a few blows, but he was relentless. He clawed at my face, trying to blind me, and I felt his teeth sink into my arm. The pain was excruciating, and I could feel the warmth of my blood seeping through my sleeve. Desperation fueled my actions, and I fought back with everything I had. The snow around us was churned up, creating a chaotic scene of white and red. Finally, I managed to grab a fallen branch and swung it at his head. He staggered, giving me a chance to break free. I ran through the forest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The station was my only hope. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches clawing at my clothes as I stumbled through the snow. I burst through the door, startling the tourists. "We need to leave, now!" I shouted. They looked at me in confusion, but the urgency in my voice spurred them into action. We gathered our things and piled into the station's snowcat, the engine roaring to life as we prepared to make our escape. As we drove away, I glanced back at the station. The strange man stood in the doorway, watching us with that same twisted smile. His eyes followed us as we disappeared into the storm, and I knew he would come after us. But for now, we were safe. The drive to the nearest town was tense, every shadow and movement outside the windows putting me on edge. The tourists were silent, their faces pale and drawn with fear. We finally reached safety, and I contacted the authorities. They launched a search for the man, but he was never found. The memory of that night haunted me, the image of the dismembered body and the man's malevolent eyes seared into my mind. I couldn't escape the feeling of his presence, like a dark cloud hanging over me. I couldn't go back to the mountains after that. The station, once a place of solitude and peace, was now tainted by the darkness I had encountered. I left my post, but the shadow of that night followed me. I tried to move on, but the memories clung to me like a second skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his twisted smile and felt the cold bite of the wind. Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting. The mountains, once my sanctuary, have become a place of fear. And the shadow in the snow is a constant reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The peace I once found in the wilderness has been replaced by a lingering sense of dread. The memory of that night is a scar that will never fully heal, a reminder of the evil that can hide behind a friendly face. I had always loved the solitude of the forest, the way the trees whispered secrets to each other in the wind, the way the earth seemed to breathe beneath my feet. As a park ranger, I found solace in the wild, away from the chaos of the city. My days were spent patrolling the vast expanse of the forest, ensuring its protection and preserving its beauty. The tranquility of the wilderness was a balm for my soul, a stark contrast to the relentless noise and bustle of urban life. Each day, I would wake up to the symphony of nature, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the distant roar of a waterfall. The forest was alive, and I felt a deep connection to every living thing within it. But nothing could have prepared me for the events that unfolded during that fateful week. It began with the discovery of the wolves. I was on my usual morning patrol when I stumbled upon their lifeless bodies. 3 magnificent creatures, their fur matted with blood, their eyes dull and vacant. The sight sent a chill down my spine. Wolves were rare in this part of the forest, and their deaths felt like an omen. The forest, usually so full of life, suddenly felt eerie and foreboding. The air seemed to grow colder, and the silence was deafening. I could feel the weight of the forest's sorrow pressing down on me, a heavy, suffocating blanket of grief. I radioed my partner, Susan, who arrived shortly after. Susan was a seasoned ranger, her experience and wisdom a guiding light in the darkest of times. Together, we buried the wolves, our hearts heavy with sorrow. As we covered their bodies with earth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The ground seemed to tremble beneath our feet, as if the forest itself was mourning the loss of these majestic creatures. The trees seemed to whisper their condolences, their leaves rustling softly in the breeze. That night, as we settled into our small cabin, the air was thick with an unsettling silence. The usual symphony of nocturnal creatures was absent, replaced by an oppressive stillness. We tried to brush it off, attributing it to the lingering sadness from the day's events. But deep down, we both knew better. The forest was trying to tell us something, and we were too preoccupied with our grief to listen. The silence was almost tangible, wrapping around us like a shroud, suffocating and inescapable. It was around midnight when the fire started. I awoke to the smell of smoke and the crackling of flames. Panic surged through me as I shook Susan awake. We scrambled to gather our essentials, but the fire spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. The heat was intense, and the smoke was suffocating. In the chaos, I lost sight of Susan. I called out her name, but the roar of the fire drowned out my voice. The flames danced wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls, their heat searing my skin. Desperation drove me out of the cabin, my lungs burning from the smoke. I stumbled into the cool night air, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of Susan. But she was gone, vanished without a trace. Fear gnawed at my insides as I searched the surrounding area, but there was no sign of her. The forest, once a place of refuge, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. The trees loomed ominously, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, and the night seemed darker than ever before. The next day, I resumed my search, determined to find her. As I ventured deeper into the forest, I came across a small clearing. There, standing over a fresh grave, was a man. His clothes were tattered, his eyes wild with a madness that sent shivers down my spine. He looked up as I approached, a sinister smile creeping across his face. The sight of him, standing in the midst of the forest, was both surreal and terrifying. His presence felt like a blight on the natural beauty of the wilderness. Looking for someone, he asked, his voice dripping with malice. I demanded to know what he had done with Susan, but he only laughed, a sound that echoed through the trees like a death knell. He spoke of the wolves, how their deaths were just the beginning, how Susan was part of something far greater than I could ever comprehend. His words were cryptic, but the menace in his voice was unmistakable. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering their warnings, their branches swaying ominously. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. This man was a killer, and he was somehow connected to the wolves and Susan's disappearance. I had to find her before it was too late. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees whispering their warnings. The man's eyes gleamed with a sinister light, and his smile was a twisted mockery of human emotion. As I turned to leave, he lunged at me, a knife glinting in the sunlight. We struggled, the knife slicing through the air, but I managed to overpower him, knocking him unconscious. I tied him up, my mind racing with questions. Who was he? What did he want? And most importantly, where was Susan? The answers seemed to elude me, hidden in the depths of the forest. The man's unconscious form was a stark reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. With no time to lose, I continued my search, my thoughts consumed by fear and determination. Hours turned into days, and just as hope began to wane, I encountered a man named Zach. He was a recluse, living off the grid in a small cabin deep within the forest. His presence was both a relief and a mystery. His eyes held a depth of knowledge that both comforted and unnerved me. He seemed to be a part of the forest, his very being intertwined with the wilderness. Zach revealed to me the truth about Susan. She wasn't just a park ranger, she was part of an ancient order, guardians of the forest and protectors of the wolves. The wolves' deaths were a warning, a signal that something was amiss. Susan had been investigating a series of disturbances in the forest, and her disappearance was no accident. The forest, it seemed, was a battleground for forces beyond our understanding. The revelation was both shocking and awe-inspiring. The killer I had encountered was part of a group that sought to exploit the forest's power for their own gain. They believed that by harnessing the energy of the wolves, they could achieve immortality. Susan had been close to uncovering their plans when she was captured. The realization was both shocking and sobering. The forest, once a place of peace and tranquility, had become a war zone, and Susan was caught in the crossfire. With Zach's help, I devised a plan to rescue Susan and put an end to the group's nefarious activities. We tracked them to an abandoned mine, where they had set up their operations. The sight of Susan, bound and bruised, fueled my resolve. We fought our way through the mine, the air thick with tension and the scent of danger. The darkness seemed to press in on us, but we pressed on, driven by a determination to save Susan and protect the forest. The mine was a labyrinth of shadows and echoes, each step fraught with peril. In the end, we emerged victorious, the killers brought to justice, and Susan freed from their clutches. But the experience left us changed, haunted by the shadows that had lurked in the wilderness. The forest, once a place of solace, now held a darker, more sinister presence. The memories of that week would forever be etched in our minds. The forest, with all its beauty and danger, had left an indelible mark on our souls. As we stood at the edge of the forest, the sun setting behind the trees, Susan turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me, for saving me." I nodded, unable to find the words to express the whirlwind of emotions that had consumed me. The forest had tested us, pushed us to our limits, but we had emerged stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of adversity. The journey had changed us, but it had also brought us closer together. The forest, with all its challenges and mysteries, had forged a bond between us that could never be broken. And as we walked away from the forest, leaving behind the shadows and the secrets, I knew that our journey was far from over. The wilderness had a way of calling us back, of reminding us that in the face of darkness, there was always a glimmer of light. The forest, with all its mysteries and dangers, had become a part of us, and we knew that we would return someday. The story was far from over, and the forest still held many secrets waiting to be uncovered. The forest, with its whispers and shadows, would always be a part of our lives, calling us back to its embrace. I had always been a city dweller, living amidst the constant noise and rush of urban life. But when I inherited a small sum of money from a distant relative, I decided it was time for a change. I wanted to escape the chaos and find solace in the tranquility of nature. So, I bought a small cabin in the woods, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The cabin was old and weathered, with peeling paint and creaky wooden steps. It was nothing like the sleek, modern apartments I was used to, but it had a certain charm that drew me in. The price was surprisingly low, almost too good to be true. But I was eager for a fresh start and didn't think twice about it. When I first arrived, I was filled with a sense of peace. The air was fresh and crisp, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. It was everything I had hoped for. As I explored the cabin, I noticed a small, hidden hatch in the floor of the bedroom. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it to find a narrow staircase leading down to a dark basement. The basement was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was filled with old, dusty bookshelves, each crammed with ancient tomes and manuscripts. The The books were about spirituality, mystical rituals, and dark magic. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized the nature of the contents. I felt a strange, unsettling energy in the room, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. A few days later, while walking through the woods, I encountered an elderly woman. She had an air of mystery about her, with long, silver hair and piercing blue eyes. She introduced herself as Agatha, a local who had lived in the area for decades. She seemed to know a lot about the cabin and warned me to be cautious. Her words were cryptic, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. As the days turned into weeks, I began to notice strange occurrences around the cabin. Objects would move on their own, and I often felt like I was being watched. My dreams were filled with disturbing images of rituals and dark figures. The sense of unease grew stronger with each passing day. One evening, I decided to confront the source of my fear. I went down to the basement and started going through the books, hoping to find some answers. The more I read, the more I realized that the cabin was cursed. It had been used for dark rituals and was now a conduit for malevolent spirits. The books contained spells and incantations that bound these spirits to the cabin, trapping anyone who lived there. I knew I had to destroy the books to break the curse. I gathered them all in the center of the basement and set them on fire. As the flames consumed the pages, I felt a surge of hope. But my relief was short-lived. The fire suddenly extinguished itself, and the room grew colder. The shadows seemed to come alive, and I was surrounded by a palpable sense of dread. In a panic, I ran upstairs and tried to leave the cabin, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if an invisible force was keeping me inside. The windows were similarly unyielding. I was trapped. Desperation set in as I realized there was no escape. Days turned into weeks, and my situation grew more dire. The spirits became more aggressive, tormenting me with whispers and visions. I could feel my sanity slipping away. The cabin, once a symbol of peace and escape, had become a prison of fear and despair. In my final attempt to break free, I confronted Agatha, hoping she could help. She revealed that she was the one who had cast the original spells, binding the spirits to the cabin. She had done so to protect the forest from those who sought to exploit its power. But she had not anticipated the curse's consequences on anyone who tried to live there. With a heavy heart, Agatha agreed to help me. Together, we performed a ritual to release the spirits and lift the curse. It was a harrowing experience, but in the end, the spirits were freed, and the cabin was cleansed. I left the woods, forever changed by my experience. The city, with all its chaos, now seemed like a haven of normalcy. I had sought escape and found something far more profound. The cabin had taught me that true peace comes not from running away, but from facing one's fears head-on. I never returned to the cabin, but its memory stayed with me. It was a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown, and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of curses. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I remember the day vividly, the sun barely peeking over the horizon when Jim and I decided to explore the abandoned mine on the outskirts of our small town. We had heard the whispers, the rumors of strange occurrences, and the mysterious disappearance of Emily, the girl who vanished without a trace 10 years ago. It was curiosity, perhaps a hint of foolishness, that drove us there. Jim, always the braver one, led the way with a determined stride. We had our flashlights, a couple of bottles of water, and our phones, just in case. The entrance to the mine loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, a gaping maw waiting to swallow us whole. As we stepped inside, An eerie chill enveloped us, and the light from outside was quickly swallowed by the oppressive darkness. We joked at first, trying to lighten the mood. "Think we'll find pirate treasure?" Jim quipped, his voice bouncing off the walls. But there was no hiding the trepidation in our steps. The path twisted and turned, the walls closing in around us. The air grew thicker, carrying with it the scent of earth and something else, something foul and decaying. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon it, a necklace, glinting faintly in the beam of my flashlight. It was delicate, silver, with a small, intricately carved pendant. I picked it up, brushing off the dirt, and noticed the initials EL engraved on the back. Emily Larson. A shiver ran down my spine. "Hey, Jim, look at this," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. He turned, eyes widening as he recognized the significance. "Do you think?" "Let's keep going," he replied, his voice steadier than I felt. "Maybe we'll find more." We pressed on, deeper into the bowels of the earth. The tunnels seemed endless, twisting into a labyrinth of rock and shadow. My flashlight flickered, and for a heart-stopping moment, I was plunged into complete darkness. Jim's light followed suit, and we were left in the oppressive, suffocating black. "Jim?" I called out, my voice a tremor. "I'm here," came the reply, but it sounded distant, almost swallowed by the mine itself. "We need to stay close." We fumbled in the dark, the walls closing in, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, faint at first but growing louder, we heard it, a whispering, like the mine itself was alive, murmuring secrets in a language we couldn't understand. It slithered into our ears, cold and malicious. "Did you hear that?" Jim's voice was now tinged with fear. "Yeah," I responded, trying to keep the terror from swallowing me whole. "Let's move." Now. We hurried, stumbling over rocks and debris, the whispers growing, merging into a chorus of ghostly voices. I could feel eyes on me, the prickling sensation of being watched. Every step felt like a step deeper into madness. And then we saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dim light. A girl, standing silently, her long hair covering her face. She was there, and yet, she wasn't. Transparent, like smoke. "Emily?" Jim whispered, his voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but as we approached, it turned and glided deeper into the mine. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, we followed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt the air thicken, making it hard to breathe. The mine seemed to pulse with a life of its own. My mind reeled, thoughts racing, fear clawing at my sanity. What were we chasing? Was it really Emily, or something far more sinister? We reached a large chamber, the ceiling high above us. The figure stood in the center, and for a moment, I thought I saw Emily's face, twisted in anguish and fear. And then she vanished, leaving behind a silence that was almost deafening. Jim and I stood there, panting, the oppressive weight of the mine pressing down on us. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. But the mine had different plans. The walls seemed to shift, the way back obscured in darkness. Panic gripped me as I realized we were lost. As we stumbled through the dark, the whispers turned into screams, echoing through the tunnels, growing closer. I could feel them, clawing at the edges of my mind. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief moment of light, I saw them, figures, twisted and grotesque, their eyes hollow, their hands reaching out. "Run!" Jim shouted, and we bolted, the terror driving us forward. The screams followed us, growing louder, closing in. We turned corner after corner, the mine a labyrinth with no escape. Exhaustion set in, my legs heavy, my breath ragged. Jim was ahead, urging me to keep moving. "Don't stop. Don't look back." But I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. The figures were there, closer than ever, their faces contorted in anguish, their eyes empty voids. We burst into another chamber, and there, in the center, was a shaft of light, a way out. But it was too far, and the figures were closing in. "Go!" Jim pushed me forward, and I ran with whatever strength I had left. But the darkness was relentless, claws reaching for me. I reached the light, plunging into it, and felt the cool air of the outside world wash over me. I turned, expecting Jim to be right behind me, but he wasn't. I called out, my voice raw, echoing back with no reply. I wanted to go back, to find him, but the figures were there, blocking the way, and I knew he was gone. I stumbled out of the mine, collapsing under the weight of grief and terror. The whispers followed me, haunting my every step, a reminder of the darkness within. And in my hand, I still clutched the necklace, its cold metal biting into my skin, a silent witness to the horrors buried in the abandoned mine's depths. The town mourned another loss, but the whispers continued, and I knew they would never truly stop. The mine had taken Jim, just as it had taken Emily, and I would always hear their echoes in the silence of the night, a chilling reminder of the price of curiosity and the unknown terrors that lurk in the shadows. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. I remember the day vividly, the sun barely peeking over the horizon when Jim and I decided to venture into the derelict mine on the outskirts of our quaint town. The whispers and rumors about strange happenings and the enigmatic disappearance of Emily, the girl who vanished without a trace a decade ago, had long piqued our curiosity. It was a potent mix of curiosity and perhaps a pinch of foolishness that drove us there. Jim, perpetually the bolder of the two of us, led the way with a resolute stride. Armed with flashlights, a couple of water bottles, and our phones for security, we approached the mine's entrance. It rose before us, dark and ominous, a gaping maw primed to engulf us. The moment we crossed the threshold, an unsettling chill wrapped around us, quickly swallowing the light from outside, leaving us in the clutches of the oppressive darkness. At first, we tried to dispel the mounting tension by joking. "Think we'll find pirate treasure?" Jim quipped, his voice echoing against the stony walls. But even jest couldn't hide the apprehension in our steps. The path meandered and twisted, the walls pressing in close around us. The air became denser, laden not just with the scent of earth, but with something far more sinister and decaying. Before long, our path was illuminated by a faint glint in the beam of my flashlight, a necklace. It was delicate, crafted from silver, with a small, intricately carved pendant. As I brushed off the dirt, the initials EL became evident, engraved on the back. Emily Larson. A shiver traveled down my spine. "Hey, Jim, look at this," I called out, my voice little more than a whisper. He turned to look, eyes widening as he recognized its significance. "Do you think?" "Let's keep going," he replied, his voice steadier than mine. "Maybe we'll find more." Emboldened by our find, we pressed further into the depths of the earth. The tunnel seemed endless, a labyrinth of rock and shadows. My flashlight flickered alarmingly, plunging us into moments of complete darkness. Jim's light soon faltered as well, casting us into a suffocating blackness. "Jim?" I called out, my voice trembling. "I'm here," came the reply, though it sounded distant, almost as if the mine itself was consuming it. "We need to stay close." Blind in the dark, we groped our way along, the air feeling thicker, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, faint at first but growing increasingly louder, we heard it, a whispering, as if the mine itself was sentient, communicating in an ancient, malevolent language we could not comprehend. The cold, malicious whispers slithered into our ears. "Did you hear that?" Jim's voice now carried an edge of fear. "Yeah," I responded, struggling to keep my terror at bay. "Let's move. Now." Our pace quickened, clumsily stumbling over rocks and debris, the whispers growing, merging into a haunting chorus of ghostly voices. I could feel unseen eyes on me, the prickling sensation of being watched. Each step seemed to carry us deeper into an abyss of madness. And then, we saw it, a spectral figure, faintly illuminated in the dim light. A girl, standing silently, her long hair concealing her face. She was there, and yet, not there, her form seeming almost like smoke. "Emily?" Jim whispered tremulously. The figure didn't respond, but as we approached, it turned and glided deeper into the mine. Without hesitating, without considering the repercussions, we followed. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the air thickened, making it increasingly difficult to breathe. The mine itself seemed to pulse with a sinister vitality. My mind spun, thoughts scrambled, fear clawing at my sanity. What were we chasing? Was it truly Emily, or something far more malevolent? We arrived at a vast chamber, the ceiling stretching high above us. The figure stood in the center, and for a fleeting moment, I saw Emily's face, contorted in anguish and fear. Then she vanished, leaving behind a silence that was almost overwhelming. Panting from exertion and fear, Jim and I found ourselves enveloped by the oppressive weight of the mine. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice coarse with terror. But the mine had its own, insidious plans. The walls seemed to shift, cloaking our return path in impenetrable darkness. Panic surged within me as I realized we were hopelessly lost. As we stumbled through the dark, the whispers escalated into screams, echoing around us, growing ever closer. I could feel them at the edges of my mind, clawing and scraping. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief flare of light, I saw them, figures, twisted and grotesque, eyes hollow and empty, and hands reaching out. "Run!" Jim shouted, and we ran, terror propelling us forward. The screams pursued us, growing louder, closing in inexorably. We twisted and turned through the labyrinthine passages of the mine, the possibility of escape dwindling with each step. Exhaustion weighed down my legs, my breath ragged. Jim, ahead of me, urged me onward. "Don't stop. Don't look back." But I couldn't resist. I glanced over my shoulder, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. The figures, closer than ever, their faces twisted in torment, their eyes void of anything human. We burst into another chamber, where a faint shaft of light pierced the darkness, a tantalizing glimpse of escape. But it seemed too far, and the figures were drawing closer. "Go!" Jim pushed me forward, and I ran with every ounce of remaining strength. The darkness was relentless, claws reaching for me. I dived into the light, feeling the cool air of the outside world against my skin. Gasping, I turned, expecting Jim to follow, but he wasn't there. I called out, my voice raw and desperate, echoing back with no reply. Part of me wanted to go back, to save him, but the figures barred the way, and deep down, I knew Jim was gone. I stumbled out of the mine, the weight of grief and terror crushing me. The whispers followed me, haunting my every step, echoes of the darkness within. In my hand, the necklace's cold metal bit into my skin, a silent witness to the horrors entombed in that forsaken mine. Our town grieved yet another loss, but the whispers never ceased, and I knew they never would. The mine had devoured Jim, just as it had Emily, and their echoes reverberated in the silence of the night, a chilling reminder of the price of curiosity and the shadowy terrors lurking in forgotten places. The whispers and the town's grief were woven into the very fabric of my existence, and I knew that each night, I would hear the murmurs of the mine, a spectral reminder of the day we stepped into the unknown, and the day the darkness claimed another soul. The weight of what we experienced never left me, shaping my every thought and dream, and reminding me of the ever-present shadows waiting to ensnare the unwary. Living in a cabin near Devil's Elbow was supposed to be a fresh start for me. Nestled in the heart of dense forest and surrounded by nature's tranquility, it seemed like the perfect place for Chloe and me to rebuild our lives after the chaos of the past few years. The cabin was a small, rustic structure with wooden beams and a stone fireplace that gave it a cozy, welcoming feel. Our dog, Diz, was particularly fond of the place, always running around the vast forest as if it were his own personal kingdom. The forest was dense and filled with towering trees, their leaves rustling in the wind, creating a soothing symphony of nature's sounds. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the polluted city we had left behind. One late summer afternoon, a dry wind blew through the treetops, and the air seemed to carry an ominous energy. We were lounging on the worn-out sofa inside the cabin, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting an orange glow through the windows. Chloe was sketching, her artistic fingers dancing over the page, creating intricate designs that seemed to come to life. I was lost in a book that I'd picked up from a second-hand store in town, the pages yellowed and worn from years of use. The peaceful evening was shattered by the distant crackle and roar of a wildfire, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to evacuate," I told Chloe, trying to mask the panic in my voice. Chloe instantly nodded, her face pale. We moved quickly, grabbing essential belongings and shoving them into backpacks. My mind was racing, calculating our best route out of the forest to safety. Chloe was ahead of me as we rushed outside to get Diz. But as I was locking the cabin door, I heard the crash of the shed door and saw Chloe hustling Diz inside. "What are you doing?" "We don't have time," I yelled, my voice filled with urgency. She looked back at me, her eyes wide with fear. "He'll be safer in here while we get the car ready," she replied, her voice trembling. Her hands were shaking as she closed the shed door, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Minutes felt like seconds as I scrambled to start the car, the keys slipping from my grasp in my haste. Chloe threw the last of our belongings into the trunk, and we were ready to go. But as the fire's edge came into view, I suddenly realized Diz was still in the shed. "I have to go back," I shouted over the roar of the approaching inferno. Chloe's eyes met mine, filled with anguish and fear, but she knew it was futile to argue. I sprinted back towards the shed, the heat from the flames beginning to sear my skin. Diz's terrified barks guided me, and I wrenched the door open, scooping him into my arms. As I turned back, a movement caught my eye, a shadow, large and looming, gliding among the trees. For an instant, I thought my eyes were deceiving me, the smoke playing tricks on my vision, but then I heard a low growl. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. The scent of burning wood mingled with a foul odor, something almost sulphurous. The beast's eyes glinted in the firelight, and my heart pounded in my chest. Memories of past traumas flooded my mind, my troubled childhood, the death of my parents, the constant struggle to find stability. I pushed onward, Diz's warm body against mine anchoring me to the present. Diz and I reached the car. I clicked the lock and threw the door open. But Chloe was gone. I spun around, calling her name, the flames now dangerously close. My calls were met with silence, the crackling fire and occasional animal scream the only responses. I had no choice but to drive away as the flames engulfed our beloved cabin. Later, the police conducted an investigation. They suspected Chloe had taken the opportunity of the chaos to run away with her ex-boyfriend to Mexico. The theory seemed absurd to me, but the lack of any other explanation left me with a hollow emptiness. The cabin was destroyed, our dreams reduced to ash. I had to start over once again, this time alone but for Diz. We moved to a small apartment in a nearby town. Life resumed a semblance of normalcy, filled with the monotonous routine of work and recovery. Yet, the past haunted me. The shadow and the fire, my lost love, the unanswered questions, they lingered like ghosts in my mind. The fire had taken not just our home, but a significant part of my life. Every night, as I lay in bed with Diz curled up at my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost much more than just a cabin. I never stopped hoping that one day, Chloe might walk back into my life, or that I might understand what really happened that fateful night. In quiet moments, I would wander to the edge of town, looking into the forest, wondering if the shadow still lurked, waiting. The inferno of Devil's Elbow had scarred me in ways I had yet to comprehend, leaving me forever unsure of the border between reality and the nightmarish flames that consumed my past. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I found myself often staring out of the window, lost in thought, replaying the events of that night over and over in my mind. The shadow, the growl, the foul odor, they haunted my dreams, blending with memories of Chloe and the life we had hoped to build together. I took long walks with Diz, hoping the fresh air and exercise would clear my mind, but the questions remained. What had I seen in the forest that night? Where had Chloe gone? The police's theory seemed more and more implausible with each passing day, but I had no answers of my own. One evening, as I was walking Diz along the edge of the forest, I thought I saw a flicker of movement among the trees. My heart raced, and I called out, hoping against hope that it might be Chloe. But there was no response, only the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkening forest, feeling the weight of my loss and the uncertainty of the future pressing down on me. Back at the apartment, I tried to distract myself with work and hobbies, but nothing seemed to fill the void left by Chloe's disappearance. I visited the site of our old cabin, now just a charred clearing in the forest, and stood there, trying to make sense of it all. The memories of our time there, the plans we had made, the love we had shared, they all seemed so distant now, like a dream that had slipped away. As the months turned into a year, I began to accept that I might never know what had happened that night. The shadow, the growl, the fire, they were all part of a mystery that might never be solved. But even as I tried to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the forest, waiting. The inferno of Devil's Elbow had taken so much from me, but it had also left me with a sense of determination. I would not let the past define me. I would continue to search for answers, to hope for Chloe's return, and to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quiet moments, as I lay in bed with Diz at my feet, I would whisper a promise to myself. I would find out what happened that night. I would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. And I would never give up on the hope that one day, Chloe might walk back into my life, and we could start anew. Until then, I would keep going, one day at a time, with Diz by my side and the memory of our cabin in my heart. The journey was far from over, and I was ready to face whatever came next. Running a video rental store on the edge of the Mojave Desert wasn't exactly the dream job I had envisioned for myself, but it paid the bills and kept me occupied. My name is Bill Greenfield, and for the past several years, I've been running this quaint little store with my cousin Johnny and our loyal dog, Croc. Our lives had settled into a routine that was simple, predictable, and quiet, until that fateful night that changed everything. That unforgettable evening began like any other. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the barren desert landscape. Inside the store, it was quiet and empty, save for the occasional tumbleweed rolling by outside and the soft hum of the neon sign. Johnny was in the back, meticulously organizing the shelves, while Croc lay sprawled on the cool floor, lazily wagging his tail, content and utterly at peace. I stationed myself at the counter, flipping absent-mindedly through the latest horror movie releases, pondering whether to bring home Nightmare on Elm Street or The Exorcist, when I heard a loud crash coming from the back room. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of anxiety washed over me. I immediately called out Johnny's name, but there was no response. Croc's ears perked up and he let out a low, ominous growl. The air grew heavy with a sense of foreboding. Without wasting a moment, I rushed to the back, pushing open the door to the storage room. The sight that greeted me was one of utter chaos. Shelves were overturned, tapes were scattered everywhere, and the room looked like a storm had ripped through it. But what struck me the most was the eerie emptiness. Johnny was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as I scoured the room, frantically calling out his name. My eyes were then drawn to the old TV set in the corner, its screen flickering with static. As I approached it, the static began to clear, revealing a grainy, disturbing video. My blood ran cold as I recognized the faces on the screen, Johnny's parents. They were tied up, bruised, and clearly in distress, tormented by an unseen force. The scene was horrifying and my mind raced with questions. What was this? Who had done this? Where was Johnny in all of this? As the unsettling video played on, a sense of dread washed over me. I realized with a sinking heart that Johnny might be in grave danger, possibly under the control of some malevolent entity or force. Determined to find him and bring him back safely, I grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the desert night, with Croc faithfully by my side. The moon cast an eerie, ghostly glow over the landscape, and the silence around us was deafening. I called out for Johnny, my voice echoing through the emptiness, but there was no reply. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up hope and return, I heard a faint sound, a whisper carried by the wind. My heart pounded as I followed the eerie whisper, the uncertainty gnawing at my nerves. The sound led me to an old, dilapidated shed, half buried in the sand. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. There, in the middle of the decaying room, stood Johnny. But he wasn't the same person I knew and loved. His eyes were vacant, void of any recognition, and an unsettling, almost sinister smile played on his lips. Croc growled, sensing the imminent danger. I took a cautious step forward, calling out to Johnny, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged at me with movements that were erratic and unnatural, as though he were a puppet controlled by invisible strings. A desperate struggle ensued. In the chaotic fray, Croc bit Johnny's leg, causing him to cry out in pain. It was enough to snap him out of whatever trance held him captive. He collapsed to the ground, clutching his head in agony. I pulled him to his feet, urging him to run, to get away from whatever darkness lurked there. We made it back to the store, but the nightmare was far from over. The events of that night left deep scars. Johnny was haunted by nightmares and terrifying visions. We tried to piece together what had happened, but the answers continued to elude us. The disturbing video of his parents remained a haunting mystery, and we could never shake the uneasy feeling that something, or someone, was constantly watching us. Years have passed since that dreadful night, but the memories remain vivid and raw. Johnny and I have moved on with our lives, but the emotional scars run deep, and the sense of loss and confusion still lingers. Croc, our loyal and brave companion, has since passed away, but his bravery on that night will never be forgotten. The video rental store is long gone, replaced by a bland convenience store, but the desert still holds its sinister secrets. I often find myself looking out at the vast expanse of the Mojave Desert, the weight of that fateful night heavy on my mind. The fear, confusion, and sense of loss are ever present, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of the light. Life goes on, but the haunting of the Mojave will forever be etched into the very core of my soul. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Are you ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away and see where the next spine-tingling adventure takes us. I never once imagined that a simple slip into the unknown could unravel the very fabric of my reality and transform my life into a waking nightmare. It all started one chilly evening, one of those nights where the cold air seeps through the cracks and the dull glow of my computer screen flickered incessantly, casting eerie shadows in the dim light of my room. I stumbled across a forum discussing the dark web, a term I had only half glimpsed in passing conversations and dark cautionary tales. Intrigued by the whispered secrets that seemed to beckon from the screen, I felt an insatiable curiosity tugging at me, pulling me in like a moth to a flame. Little did I know, I was about to embark on a journey that would haunt me relentlessly, a personal odyssey that would stay with me until the end of my days. With each click, I sank deeper into the abyss that is the dark web. It was a labyrinth of shadows, a world where anonymity reigned supreme, and morality was but a distant memory, the ghost of a whisper lost among the echoes. I encountered marketplaces bustling with illicit goods, drugs, weapons, stolen identities, even counterfeit currencies that promised an escape from mundane reality. I felt a mix of apprehension and thrill coursing through me as I navigated through the neon-lit pages, reading absurd advertisements for items I'd only heard about in hushed, frightened whispers. The allure was intoxicating, and I found myself lost in this strange, disturbing carnival of the macabre. Among the bizarre offerings that paraded before my eyes, one particular advertisement caught my eye: death dolls. The title alone sent shivers down my spine, each letter igniting a spark of morbid terror within me, and my heart raced with a peculiar blend of fear and dark fascination. I clicked on the link, and a video began to load, revealing a grotesque display that twisted my insides. A mannequin-like figure, adorned in disheveled and dirty clothing, was positioned against an unsettling backdrop, the atmosphere thick with dread and anticipation. The seller, a hooded figure, described the items with a chilling glee, their voice dripping with a sadistic delight. It was an auction of sorts, a cruel game where the highest bidder could customize their own doll, complete with an unsettling backstory that no sane person would want to consider. My stomach turned at the vile reality of the situation, yet I felt compelled to keep watching as if unable to look away from the horror unfolding before my very eyes. Days bled into weeks, each one blending into the next, as I reluctantly found myself returning to the dark corners of the web. Each session exposed me to a new level of depravity, each deeper and darker than the last. I watched live streams of extreme punishments, real people subjected to the sadistic whims of their captors in a grotesque show for anonymous viewers. The chat boxes were flooded with viewers cheering and betting on the outcomes, their excitement palpable as if they were watching a twisted game show, relishing in the agony of others as they placed wagers on the suffering laid bare before them. I felt trapped in a vortex of fear, excitement, and overwhelming guilt, wrestling with a desperate urge to disconnect, but finding myself unable to tear away from the madness that had consumed me. It wasn't long before I realized that I had fallen into a pit from which there was no escape. The initial thrill that coursed through me had morphed into a sinister compulsion, a perverse addiction I never sought to develop. I began receiving emails from anonymous accounts that seemed to know my deepest, darkest curiosities, urging me to join exclusive forums, crumbs of sinister promises about unveiling secrets and revelations that could change everything. Against my better judgment, I clicked the links that dangled before me like a siren's call. The invitation led me to a private chat room where a few select individuals engaged in discussions rife with violence and unspeakable terror. They took turns sharing their experiences, each one more horrifying than the last, as they boasted about their misdeeds as if they were badges of honor, each confession dripping with pride and malevolence. One individual, known only as Cypher, piqued my interest like a moth drawn to the flame. Their writings were articulate yet chilling, crafting narratives that ensnared my imagination while simultaneously disgusted me. I found myself drawn into their web of manipulation and deceit, hanging on to their every word, unable to resist the urge to delve deeper. Cypher spoke of a network that reached far beyond what I had explored, a sinister world involving kidnapping, extortion, and even human trafficking, horrors I had read about but never truly believed existed. My heart pounded with both fear and morbid curiosity as I absorbed their messages, and before I knew it, I had unwittingly signed my name to a game so sinister and foreboding that I could scarcely comprehend its implications. Not long after, I received a new email that sent chills down my spine. The subject line read simply, "Welcome to the game." My heart sank like a stone as I opened the message, revealing a set of rules and a chilling invitation to participate in something I could scarcely wrap my mind around. I was to be a player in a deadly contest, where survival hinged on my ability to outwit others trapped in this web of terror, a sick reality that was more nightmare than I could have ever fathomed. The night of the game arrived with a sense of dread hanging in the air like a thick fog. I found myself in a dimly lit room, a webcam staring at me, sending my image into the endless void of the dark web, a broadcast that stripped away my identity and placed me in the crosshairs of unseen eyes. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined, an intensity that left me quaking in my seat. Each participant was presented with increasingly difficult choices that pitted our morals against our primal instincts, a cruel test of human nature. I watched in horror as others were forced to make unfathomable decisions. Betrayal, sacrifice, and violence became the grim currency of survival in this hellish game. In the midst of this chaos, I saw things that would forever change me in ways I could never begin to understand. I witnessed a man bound to a chair, his cries echoing in the void as another player mercilessly forced him to inflict harm upon himself. I realized in that moment that I could leave at any time, that I had the power to break free from these chains, but the knowledge that my escape would come at the cost of someone else's suffering crystallized into a paralyzing fear. In that moment, I was no longer just a passive spectator. I had become complicit in their torment, an unwilling participant in a grand, horrifying theater. The further we delved into the game, the more I succumbed to the darkness that surrounded me, enveloping me like a shroud. With each choice, I felt my humanity slipping away, fading into the void as I was consumed by my surroundings. I was no longer the curious individual searching for thrills. I had irrevocably transformed into a participant in the worst kind of horror story, a cautionary tale personified. The mental toll was unbearable, an avalanche of nightmarish visions that replayed in my mind long after I closed my eyes, robbing me of the peace I once took for granted. Finally, the game reached its unbearable climax. The remaining players, the ones who had survived this twisted ordeal, were led to an underground arena, a blood-soaked stage where survival was the only goal and mercy had no place. My heart raced and my breath quickened as I stood among the chosen few, the uncomfortable realization dawning on me that not all of us would be leaving alive. I felt sick, a churning nausea swirling in my stomach as I watched others revel in the chaos, their laughter echoing eerily in the cavernous space, a sinister symphony of madness that played out in front of me. In the end, I was forced to confront Cypher, the orchestrator of this madness, the puppet master pulling all the strings in this grotesque theater of horrors. With a sadistic grin spreading across their face, they taunted me, exposing my fears and regrets as if they were treasures laid bare. I realized too late that this was never just a game, it was a carefully constructed trap designed to expose the darkest recesses of the human soul, a mirror reflecting the vile truths I had desperately tried to ignore. I fought back, desperately trying to escape the clutches of a reality I could no longer bear, to break free from the chains that bound me to this nightmarish existence. What came next was a blur, a chaotic whirlwind of despair and panic. I became a mere shadow, slipping through the chaos of the night until I finally emerged from the abyss, gasping for air like a drowning man, light blinding and disorienting after what felt like an eternity spent locked in torment. But freedom came at a dreadful price. The horrors I witnessed lingered in my mind, shadows that danced beyond the light of day, echoes of screams reverberating in the dark corners of my thoughts. Months have passed since that fateful night, yet I still find myself haunted by the memories of what I had seen and done, shackled by the reflections of my own choices. The dark web was not just an exploration of the grotesque, it had revealed the fragility of my humanity, the thin veneer that separates us from our primal instincts. I now live with the weight of my choices, a constant reminder that curiosity can lead one into depths from which there is no return, an abyss from which it is impossible to escape unscathed. As I sit in front of my computer, the glow of the screen may seem inviting, but I can't help but wonder how many more souls are wandering the dark web, enticed by the allure of the forbidden, drawn by a morbid curiosity that could lead them down the same torturous path I traversed. The mind has a way of forgetting pain, but the imprints of horror remain etched forever, a stain on the fabric of my consciousness. I urge those who read this to steer clear of that abyss, to resist the siren call of the dark, for once you peek into the shadows, it may consume you whole, leaving nothing behind but a hollow shell of who you once were. The cool breeze of the Californian forest welcomed me as I stepped out of my car, my backpack slung over my shoulder. It was a journey I had longed for, a solitary escape from the ceaseless hum of city life. I had dreamed about the serenity of the tall, whispering trees and the rustling leaves underfoot. Little did I know that the forest had a different story carved out for me. The first day was filled with wonder. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating a mosaic of light on the forest floor. I hiked for hours, my path guided by the chirping of birds and the occasional scamper of small animals. By dusk, I set up my camp near a bubbling creek, the sound of the water providing a soothing backdrop. The sky above turned a deep shade of purple, and the stars began to peek through, one by one. I felt a profound sense of peace, a connection with nature that I had not felt in years. As night fell, I made myself comfortable, the warmth of the campfire battling the cold wind. The crackling firewood and the distant hoot of an owl added to the ambience. Suddenly, I noticed a pair of eyes reflecting the firelight from across the creek. As I focused, the figures of a man and woman emerged from the shadows. They approached, their smiles too wide, eyes too keen. Our conversation was short and uncomfortable. Their vague answers about their own journey and lack of visible gear struck a chord of suspicion within me. They seemed out of place, their presence an anomaly in the serene wilderness. They left abruptly, the darkness swallowing them once more. My mind buzzed with confusion, but exhaustion pulled me into a restless sleep. The night, however, was far from peaceful. Whispers carried by the wind seemed to circle my tent. I awoke several times, clutching the hunting knife my father had gifted me. The whispers were indistinct, like fragments of a conversation just out of reach. At dawn, the whispers faded, replaced by the joyous songs of birds greeting the day. The sun's rays pierced through the trees, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the morning mist. Packing my gear, I discovered my food supplies had been rummaged through. Missing items and the couple's unsettling presence gnawed at my nerves. Nevertheless, I pressed on, wanting to believe it was just a misunderstanding or a nocturnal animal. The day was spent traversing denser parts of the forest. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a natural tunnel. As evening approached, I stumbled upon an old, overgrown trail. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow it. The path led to an open area encircled by trees so thick they formed a wall. In the center, a lone cabin stood, worn down by time. Cautiously, I approached, the eeriness of the place making the hairs on my neck stand. The door creaked open under my touch, revealing a sparsely furnished room. Cobwebs adorned every corner, and the air was stale. Among the dust-covered items, I found a journal. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, the pages yellowed with age. Flipping through its pages, a knot tightened in my stomach. The entries detailed the experiences of different hikers who had come across the cabin and the sinister events that unfolded after. Missing supplies, whispered voices, and sightings of the mysterious couple mirrored my own encounters. The final entry was a scrawl of desperation, warning to leave immediately and never return. The handwriting grew increasingly frantic, the words barely legible towards the end. Heart pounding, I left the cabin. The sun was setting, and shadows grew longer. Determined to distance myself from the cabin, I hiked until darkness set in. As I set up camp, fear twisted my gut. The journal's warnings echoed in my mind, a harbinger of the night's events. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, its silence oppressive. Once again, whispers surrounded my tent. This time, they were closer, more insistent. Footsteps crunched the leaves just beyond the firelight. My breath hitched as I saw the couple at the edge of my camp, their eyes glinting menacingly. They didn't approach but stood there, watching. Their presence was a silent threat, their expressions unreadable in the flickering firelight. Dread paralyzed me until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. The couple vanished with the darkness, leaving an unsettling silence. Exhausted and scared, I made the decision to leave the forest. Hastily packing, I retraced my steps, every snap of a twig causing my heart to leap. The journey back was grueling, my senses heightened, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. The 2-day hike out of the forest was a blur of anxiety. I felt eyes on me constantly, heard the whispers even in broad daylight. Relief flooded me as I finally reached my car, but the fear lingered, an unwelcome companion. The drive back to the city was long and silent, the events of the past days replaying in my mind. Back in the city, the experience haunted me. Sleepless nights were filled with the imagined whispers and glinting eyes. The forest, once a symbol of peace, had turned into a source of unending dread. The memories clung to me, a dark shadow over my daily life. I found myself avoiding parks and wooded areas, the thought of trees and shadows sending chills down my spine. Years later, a similar tale reached me. A couple in Arkansas had a disturbing encounter during their hike, a green tent with the carcass of a mutilated deer inside. They fled, avoiding further danger, but left with a scar on their memories. The story resonated with me, a chilling reminder of my own ordeal. The wilderness holds many secrets, some better left unknown. My journey had started with a quest for tranquility but ended in a lifelong unease. I will always wonder about the couple in the forest and the true nature of their intent. The whispers of the wilderness have forever marked my soul, a persistent reminder of the unknown lurking just beyond the veil of nature. The forest, with its ancient trees and hidden paths, remains a place of mystery and fear, its secrets forever etched in my memory. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next creepy tale. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. Hope you enjoyed that spine-chilling experience. Now, let's move on to the next eerie tale. This time, we are venturing into the wilderness. Ready to face more thrilling moments together? Let's dive into the next story right away. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dense forest, creating an eerie atmosphere as I set up camp for the night. I had chosen a remote spot for my weekend escape, far away from the bustling world and technology. It was just me, my tent, and the symphony of nature. At least, that's what I thought. The chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves provided a soothing backdrop, but as the light faded, a sense of foreboding crept in, wrapping around me like a thick fog. As dusk settled in, I built a fire, the flickering flames providing warmth and an illusion of safety. The crackling sounds danced through the stillness, but soon, I noticed something strange, an uncomfortable feeling creeping up my spine. I brushed it off, attributing it to the isolation and the unfamiliar noises of the wilderness. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, I reasoned. After all, I had come here to enjoy the solitude, to reconnect with nature, and to escape the chaos of everyday life. After devouring my simple meal, I decided to turn in early, hoping that sleep would wash away my unease. As I lay in my sleeping bag, cocooned in its warmth, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The rustling of leaves outside my tent seemed to grow louder, punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig. Just as I was drifting to sleep, I heard it, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the trees. My heart raced as I lay frozen in fear, unsure if it was a figment of my imagination or something more sinister lurking outside. The sound sent chills down my spine, and I felt a primal instinct to flee. Suddenly, there was a loud crash followed by an unsettling silence. With trembling hands, I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer outside. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows that danced ominously around me, but the forest was still. What could have caused that noise? I convinced myself it was just an animal, possibly a deer or a raccoon, though deep down, I knew it felt wrong. The stillness of the night only heightened my anxiety, and I found myself wishing I had chosen a more populated campsite. The next day, I decided to hike the nearby trails, hoping to shake off my unease and immerse myself in the beauty of the wilderness. The lush greenery surrounded me, and the sun filtered through the leaves, creating patches of light on the ground that felt warm and inviting. But there was something off about the tranquility. The chirping birds fell silent, and an oppressive weight seemed to fill the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I shrugged it off as my imagination, determined to enjoy my adventure and not let fear dictate my experience. As I trekked deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin nestled among the trees. Curiosity got the better of me, and I approached it, feeling an inexplicable pull towards the decaying structure. The door creaked open with a gentle push, revealing dust-covered furniture and remnants of a forgotten life. Photographs hung askew on the walls, their glass cracked, faces staring blankly into the void. An ominous energy filled the room, and a shiver ran down my spine as I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. I quickly left, eager to continue my hike, trying to forget the lingering sensation of being observed, but the image of the cabin stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. As night fell once again, I returned to my campsite, exhaustion settling in my bones. The fire crackled back to life, and I tried to shake off the unease from the cabin, but the darkness felt thicker this time, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel the shadows lengthening, creeping closer with each passing moment. As I sat by the fire, I caught a glimpse of a light flickering in the distance, not the steady glow of a campfire, but an erratic, pulsating glow. My pulse quickened as I stared into the dark, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. What was it? They exchanged worried glances, but I could see excitement glimmering in their eyes, as if my fear ignited a spark of adventure within them. You're just imagining things, one of them chuckled, dismissing my terror, but I knew what I had experienced was real, etched into my memory like a scar. As I walked away from the forest, the weight of dread lifted slightly, but my mind kept replaying the events of the past few days. The man, the whispers, the light, nothing was as it seemed in that wilderness. I had ventured into nature searching for peace, but instead, I had stumbled upon a haunting reminder that some secrets in the woods are best left untouched, hidden beneath the surface like a dark current. I would never forget that weekend, the terror etched into my memory, a ghost story born from the beauty of the wild. And though I escaped with my life, a part of me would always wonder about the darkness lurking just beyond the trees, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander into its grasp. The wilderness, I realized, is not just a place of beauty, it is a realm of mysteries, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and where the echoes of the past linger like shadows, forever haunting those who dare to tread its paths. Intrigued and unnerved, I decided to investigate, despite the warning bells ringing in my head. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the strange luminosity, careful to stay on the well-trodden path. The closer I got, the more I realized it was not a campfire at all. It was something otherworldly, a bluish light hovering just above the ground, casting an eerie glow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding with each step, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my grip. Suddenly, the light flickered and disappeared, plunging me into darkness. My gut twisted in panic, and I turned to leave when I noticed a figure standing back on the trail, a man, tall and foreboding, his silhouette stark against the backdrop of trees. Panic surged through me, and I quickly ducked behind a tree, my breath visible in the night air, each exhale a reminder of my vulnerability. "What are you doing out here?" I heard him call into the darkness, his voice gravelly yet calm, sending a chill down my spine. My mind raced. Should I respond? Should I run? I remained silent, my heart thumping in my chest like a war drum. He walked closer, shining a flashlight in my direction, and I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. The shadows danced around us, and I felt as if I was caught in a nightmare, unable to wake up. Suddenly, the man turned sharply and walked back down the path, disappearing into the shadows. I waited a few minutes, my heart racing, before I dared to leave my hiding spot. My instincts screamed for me to return to my campsite, but curiosity lingered, drawing me back to the path he had taken. Something wasn't right, and I needed to uncover the truth, even if it meant facing my fears. Upon returning to my campsite, I found my tent torn open, as if something had slashed through it, a chilling sight that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. I fumbled with my gear, shoving everything into my backpack, frantically scanning the area for a safe place. The realization that someone, or something, had invaded my space filled me with dread. That night, I sat in the remains of my campfire, clutching a knife, my eyes darting at every rustle. Ghostly sounds surrounded me, and I could swear I heard whispers on the wind, faint yet unmistakable. Sleep eluded me as paranoia consumed my thoughts, each creak of the forest amplifying my fears. I felt like a prisoner in my own mind, unable to escape the terror that had taken root. The morning light finally broke through the trees, dispersing the darkness that had felt so suffocating. Heart heavy and exhausted, I began my hike back towards civilization, but the forest seemed to conspire against my escape. Trails I had previously traversed felt foreign, trees appeared denser, and shadows seemed to loom larger, closing in on me like a predator stalking its prey. Just as I thought I was near safety, I heard a soft voice from behind, drawing my attention. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered, a cold breeze brushing against my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I spun around but found nothing, only the haunting silence of the forest, as if it had swallowed the voice whole. Fueled by fear, I sprinted through the woods, branches clawing at my skin, leaving scratches that stung like fire. Every footfall seemed echoed by a shadow behind me, relentless and closing in, a presence that I could feel but not see. My lungs burned, but I pressed on, desperate for the safety of the trailhead, my heart hammering in my chest like a drum. Finally, I burst into a clearing, my heart racing as I stumbled upon a group of hikers preparing for their journey. Relief washed over me as I approached them, gasping for air, my mind racing with the horrors I had just endured. "What happened to you?" one of them asked, concern etched on their face, their eyes wide with curiosity. "There's something in the woods," I stammered, "something watching." Growing up in the small town of Sutherland, Nebraska, my childhood was defined by vast fields that stretched endlessly, quiet streets where you could hear a pin drop, and an air of eerie tranquility that settled over the town each evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, and the days blended into one another with a sense of calm that was both comforting and unsettling. I was 12 when my best friend, Shelby, and I stumbled upon the most thrilling and terrifying experience of our young lives, an exploration of the long-abandoned Sutherland Inn, infamously known for a gruesome murder that had taken place years before, casting a long shadow over the town. The inn, a decaying Gothic structure at the edge of town, had always been a source of intrigue and ghost stories among the local kids. Its tall, spindly towers and darkened windows seemed to watch over the town like a silent sentinel. On a brisk autumn afternoon, with the sky overcast and the wind brisk, Shelby and I decided it was time to uncover the mysteries of the old and ourselves. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched under our feet as we made our way towards the inn. As we approached the creaking gates, our hearts pounded with a mixture of excitement and fear, the kind of fear that only comes from the unknown. The inn loomed before us, its windows darkened with grime, and its once glorious exterior now a shadow of its former self. The grand entrance, which must have once welcomed guests with open arms, now seemed to repel intruders with its foreboding presence. We pushed open the heavy front door, which groaned in protest, and stepped into the dimly lit foyer. Dust danced in the slivers of light that penetrated through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was stale, tinged with a scent of old wood and something else, something metallic and unsettling that we couldn't quite place. Our footsteps echoed through the empty halls as we ventured deeper into the inn, the sound bouncing off the walls and creating an eerie symphony of whispers. We whispered to each other as if raising our voices might awaken the spirits rumored to haunt the place. Each creak of the floorboards and each gust of wind seemed to carry a warning. We found ourselves in a grand parlor, where cobwebs adorned the chandelier like eerie decorations, and the furniture was draped in sheets that resembled ghostly figures. As we continued our exploration, we stumbled upon a room that seemed different from the others. The door was slightly ajar, and a strange feeling washed over us as we entered. The first thing that caught our eyes was the dark, rust-colored stain on the wall, blood. My stomach churned as we approached it, feeling the weight of the inn's sinister history press down on us. The stories we had heard suddenly felt all too real. "Do you think it's real?" Shelby's voice trembled as she pointed to the stain, her hand shaking slightly. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "But let's keep going." The words felt heavy in my mouth, and I wondered if we were making a mistake. In the adjoining bathroom, a shattered mirror reflected our nervous faces in fragmented pieces, each shard showing a different aspect of our fear. Scattered on the floor were feathers and the lifeless bodies of small birds. It was as if they had flown in, seeking refuge, only to meet a tragic end. The sight chilled us to the bone, and we decided it was time to leave that dreadful room. The sense of dread was growing stronger, and we knew we had to be careful. We made our way to the attic, a place we had both been curious about since we first set foot in the inn. The narrow staircase creaked under our weight as we climbed, each step feeling like it might give way beneath us. The door to the attic was surprisingly well preserved, almost as if it had been recently used. We pushed it open and stepped into a space cluttered with old furniture, trunks, and other forgotten relics. The air was thick with dust, and the dim light made everything look like it was frozen in time. As we inspected the attic, something caught my eye, a faint light coming from behind an old wardrobe. My heart raced as I signaled to Shelby, and together we moved the wardrobe aside, revealing a hidden door. We exchanged uneasy glances but couldn't resist the urge to find out what lay beyond. The curiosity that had driven us this far was now mixed with a growing sense of fear. The small room was dark, and the air was thick with dust. As our eyes adjusted to the dimness, we heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like someone whispering. Panic surged through us, and for a moment, we were paralyzed with fear. The whispers seemed to be coming from all around us, and the darkness felt oppressive. Then, as if breaking a spell, we bolted from the attic, down the stairs, and out of the inn, our hearts pounding in our chests. Breathless and wide-eyed, we ran all the way back to Shelby's house. We didn't talk about what we had heard, but it was clear that our adventure had taken a dark and unexpected turn. The fear that had gripped us in the inn had followed us home, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The following days were filled with unease. At school, Shelby and I exchanged knowing glances but never spoke of the inn. The silence between us was heavy, and we both knew that the inn had left a mark on us. Then, one afternoon, a plain, unmarked envelope arrived at my house. Inside was a single piece of paper with a chilling message: "You are not alone. Come back." Shelby and I were terrified. Who could have sent the note? How did they know about our exploration? We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the inn had cast a shadow over us that we couldn't escape. The note haunted us, and even though we tried to convince ourselves it was just a prank, deep down, we knew there was more to the story. Our once mundane lives were now shrouded in a sense of dread. The note haunted us, and even though we tried to convince ourselves it was just a prank, deep down, we knew there was more to the story. The Sutherland Inn still held secrets, and somehow, its dark history had intertwined with our futures in ways we were only beginning to comprehend. The sense of being watched never completely left us, and every creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind made us jump. As the days turned into weeks, the fear gradually subsided, but the memory of our exploration never faded. Shelby and I made a pact never to speak of it again, hoping to leave the past behind us. But the shadow of Sutherland Inn lingered, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The note remained hidden in a drawer, a constant reminder of that day. Years later, as an adult, I occasionally find myself drawn back to that day, to the whispers in the attic, and to the mysterious note that changed everything. The inn still stands, now more decrepit than ever, a monument to a sinister past. And while I may never return, a part of me remains connected to that place, forever bound by the shadows of Sutherland Inn. The memories of that day are etched into my mind, and the fear we felt is something I will never forget. Alright, that's the end of today's story. Thank you for joining me on this thrilling journey through the shadows of life and death. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the little bell to get more spine-chilling tales from Whisper of Horror. Remember, every soul has a story, and here, we give them a voice. See you next time. Stay curious, stay cautious, and keep whispering horror.